All right. Hey, everyone. Welcome to Gen Weekly. It's weekly broadcast for the Global Engagement Network Media Co-op. No scripts, no corporate influence, just real talk about issues, trends, stories, and headlines from the previous week. Don't just watch, engage. Welcome to today's version. It's March 7th, 2017. It's Gen Weekly. We're doing an ACA spot or a little bit. We're talking about action ear to ear to the ground, and then we're going to be doing Gen announcements and saying goodbye to you. Should be a nice, quick, concise, and interesting story, or some stories and a show today. So the first thing we're going to do is pass it off to John to talk to us a little bit more about Gen Monthly.
Cool, thanks, Sean. Let me go ahead and get that up here. So Gen Monthly, you guys, is going to be March 26th, 2017. This month's video conference is Water and Its Protectors. So we're looking to amplify the voices of water protectors, indigenous tribes whose lands are being targeted, any veterans who are standing by water protectors and the protesters, any organizers in Flint, Michigan, Indiana, Massachusetts, any other city that is currently affected and plagued by natural resource intrusion into their natural water supplies, and any organizations against nuclear dumping in the Great Lakes. So check us out. We'll be releasing more information as we go. We will have Ed Higgins on from Activate Now as part of the panel. Ernest and a couple other folks in the Global Engagement Network are still working on bringing some panelists into the table, but it is going to be a great time, and we look forward to seeing everybody there. So let's get right into our content today with our healthcare and WikiLeaks. And so for healthcare, first off, how are you guys today?
Oh, I'm
Everyone's
good.
on mute. You're good, Sean?
Oh, yeah.
So we have Sean, Ernest, and Allison here tonight. First two slides of content are healthcare and WikiLeaks. If you guys can see down at the bottom here, I highlighted. It said the column in the middle dominated today's news cycle by the big media companies. They mentioned and showed the presser from column 3, and there was absolutely zero about column 1. And none of them knew how to cover the WikiLeaks story. We'll get into that in just a minute. But the slide that you guys are looking at right here talks about the 3 different Republican bills that are going to be competing for victory inside the repeal of the Affordable Care Act, repeal and replace of the Affordable Care Act. So the first one was put together by Cassidy and Collins. That's called the Patient Freedom Act. We'll come back to that. But Trump Care was what I said dominated the news cycle today, the American Health Care Act. And basically you can see in the middle, repeal of the ACA covering pre-existing conditions, equalizing the tax treatment of health insurance. That was their big push. Improving health savings accounts. That was met with immediate objection today from 4 or 5 very conservative governors led by Rand Paul. And they have a legislation called the OCR, the Obamacare Replacement Act, which goes for a full repeal of the Affordable Care Act with some language about letting states and the free market create a robust healthcare system. And then the one on the far left, the Patient Freedom Act by Cassidy and Collins, that repeals 5 burdensome mandates from the Affordable Care Act and restore states' control over implementation. So they can either continue Obamacare with provisions, or they can have an opt-out portion of it. So, what do you guys think about those three? And the links for all those are in the slides, and we'll have those available in the description on YouTube. What do you guys think about?
Well, I myself haven't looked into this too much, but obviously this is them trying their best to keep their voters happy. And so, as far as like keeping the things they kept that were not necessarily the best, the favorites of the Republicans are meant to stay in there to keep everyone happy and kind of stop them from complaining. But I mean, that's as far as my understanding of some of this goes. But I know that some of you I think it was Ernest that had something interesting to say on this topic for sure. Not to put us in the spotlight.
Yeah, I can't remember what I said earlier.
Well, it was touching upon the point that they're trying to give more control over the states, and how that's definitely gonna taking it away from certain states that opted in are gonna get, they're kind of gonna get screwed over in the deal because they're now going to be left behind, sort of.
I think I might have been talking about some of the budgets, because the states
right
pulled budgeting back because the federal government has been putting more money in. And so one of the dangers of essentially, corporations are always trying to push the burden and the costs to the individuals or to individual states, instead of taking a kind of collective responsibility for situations. And one of the big things that I heard about Trump Care today in particularly was that it actually has provisions in there that incentivize high CEO pay. And so I think this is going to be, it's going to carry over the same failures that Obamacare had, is that now just a different set of corporations are going to be able to make a very large profit at our expense, and we're not going to get better healthcare for it. We're not going to get cheaper healthcare for it. We're still going to be the only quote unquote civilized country on the planet that doesn't have a single payer healthcare system.
Yeah, I mean,
is it safe to assume that you guys don't believe that the free market will be able to handle healthcare in an appropriate fashion?
One, the fact that we have a free market is kind of a myth, because we have a market that's heavily influenced by regulations and human activity. And healthcare is not something that, competitive market environments work really good in certain industries where you have innovation, a lot of creativity, but in a healthcare industry where you're actually providing like a service to the public and everybody benefits from this service, there's no reason that a small group of people should be able to profit off of our sickness or lack of education as a society, because everybody's benefited. It's kind of like a fire department. Would you want, a corporation to be running your fire department? We know how that works with water supplies. It's the same with healthcare. And that's why other nations a long time ago have been providing healthcare to their citizens. That's why our representatives receive socialized medical health, benefits. Yeah. I don't know.
Does
Go
that
ahead,
also
John.
mean you don't believe that prisons should be operating on the stock market?
Well, we covered that last week a little bit.
Yeah. So no, I was I could click the button to the next slide.
the ones that are paying their CEOs over $500,000 a year. And some of the other things on the table are totally defunding Planned Parenthood, abortion coverage. And I mean, I agree with some of the other comments. I mean, I think that we're scrambling and over crumbs when, I mean, the fact is that, everybody would benefit, even, businesses and business owners and employers, if you want to look at it that way, if we had universal single-payer health coverage. But there's a lot of resistance to that in this country.
Sure.
A lot of misinformation. I mean, the media, mainstream media, that's very, one way. It just avoids the discussion, right? So that's why they're going to kind of throw three seeming options out on the table, but none of the options actually address the facts around healthcare and what's effective with healthcare. And yeah.
Yep. All right. So good. Thanks for the discussion on healthcare. So we'll see which one of these bills wins. Which one of these bills wins? I think if you can do the double plural. WikiLeaks dropped this morning. Actually, it seems like they've been leading up to this for a while. So most people who are in the know and who follow WikiLeaks knew that there was something coming down. And today they finally released the documents and made them available, or at least made the story available and what they were going to do. I just took our traditional thing that we do and represent the headlines from far right to far left. And I chose NPR first for the far left, and then I found the Atlantic one, and so I included that in there. But you can see the difference in the headlines. Not really that much difference in terms of in terms of the story. So Breitbart said WikiLeaks releases CIA data dump, claims press conference live stream is under attack. Fox said WikiLeaks releases entire hacking capacity of the CIA. NBC says WikiLeaks releases alleged CIA hacking secrets. And NPR said WikiLeaks releases what it calls CIA trove of cyber espionage documents. And then the Atlantic said, should journalists be more cautious of WikiLeaks?
Very interesting stuff. Yeah. Well, as far as the whole story goes, I mean, you have some people saying that this was leaked by Russia. Obviously, you've got Julian Assange actually denying that. You also have people from like the University of California. There's a professor there that said that there's no way that the CIA was hacked from the outside. This is definitely an internal leak. So that sort of thing is interesting to think about and talk about. Beyond that, it's just interesting that these are things that, like you said, it's not shockers that some of these things we're seeing are true. They were certainly things that we talked about in different parts of the news and online media, but definitely to see them come out in actual documents is interesting. From the ability to use fake off mode in smart TVs and record conversations, to being able to hack into your phone, send geolocations to CIA. They can do audio and text communications, even if they're encrypted, and they even can covertly activate your phone and camera. And they can, there was a little bit of talk from what I saw about being able to hack cars, which brings up, Michael Hastings for me, interesting relevance there. And so there's some very, very interesting things that they show. And so, what do you guys think?
I think it's interesting. They talk about how they can install stuff on computers to run programs, and
Yep.
it seemed like they were from WikiLeaks. They were saying that they were running fast and loose with those programs, and they have their own basic hacking team. Where if any of that stuff gets out and gets into the wrong hands, it's vicious malware that could really, really interrupt commerce, interrupt trade, interrupt stuff that is going on the internet all the time. And so I think it was also a call, like from WikiLeaks, they kind of framed it as a broader call to arms in terms of really exploring what's going on with the massive surveillance and the amount of big data, the amount of data, that micro data that they're able to capture and turn that into big data reports. I think is very compelling. It's scary, I think, because there's a lot of people that are like saying, "Oh, well, we've known this, and they do this all the time, and things like that." But I think that there are other people that won't even touch it, won't even talk about it, because the fact of the matter is that it's so vast that it probably scares them. From the NPR article, one thing that I wrote down, it said the purported documents reference and describe agency tools designed to extract information from computers, monitor communications, and control electronic devices. And then there was one from the Atlantic that said the analysis of WikiLeaks' release appears to be nudging reporters toward a few storylines in particular. One is bureaucratic infighting between the CIA and the National Security Agency, and two, the dangers of cyber weapons proliferation, to name two. He said, but a section of the release with answers to frequently asked questions includes an odd section that speaks directly to journalists. This is still from the Atlantic. One answer encourages reporters who might fear that others will find all of the best stories for me. WikiLeaks responds, unlikely. There are very considerably more stories than there are journalists or academics who are in a position to write them. What do you guys think about that?
Well, I think it's interesting to even say, if you go beyond, it says those who demonstrate journalistic excellence may be considered for early access to future parts. So it's the whole question on if they should be more cautious about WikiLeaks, I guess, is the idea that, I don't know, I wonder how much it plays into the idea that, oh, maybe Russia's leaking, leaking the stuff to them. And so how much does that play into, is he purely going against America because he's anti-American, or is he really just for information and open information?
Right.
I'm still on the side of open information. It just happens that there's a lot for us to learn about in America, right?
That's right. And if you look at what they did, like they redacted a lot of names. They did not release any of
coding,
the malware, or any of the coding. They
right.
just released, they're just targeting Americans.
Oh, really? See, exactly. Yeah, that's not necessarily true. If you go and you actually look on their site, it's certainly not true. And it's worth mentioning that they haven't always redacted. I mean, that's kind of uncharacteristic. They're pretty out in the open about not editing stuff, but they knew this was important for people to see, but that there was sensitive information there that that wasn't relevant, right? And so they took steps to precautionary steps in that matter, and that's worth mentioning for sure. But yeah, just more very interesting, CIA motives, and operations. And that brings me to, Michael Hastings, who died a few years ago now, and he wrote for, he wrote Runaway General and the operators against, I believe it was General McChrystal. I could be wrong about that, but point being that he even at the time said that led to the general's resignation, and he even had audio and reports given of being threatened by his inner circle. And he also, right around time of his death, spoke about believing he was car. And I'm not saying there was, but they think whoever did it probably would get away with it. So essentially just the idea that, and this has been an independent study that other non-military and non-government organizations have confirmed that this is possible. So, it's scary in the way that, the CIA doesn't have a great track record. In fact, it's appalling. And this just shows more about how they're looking to make future moves and keep us under surveillance. And they really can't put forth any evidence that it's really keeping anyone safer. If they had evidence that said, hey, look, we're doing this and it stopped X crime, that I think they'd probably propagandize the heck out of that, but they don't because it's just not there. And and when it is, and they do stop it, it's hard to know where it would come, because obviously you want to stop it as early as possible in the planning stage or what have you. And so it's always hard to know what that was going to lead to. But there you are. Any final thoughts on this one?
No, I don't. Only because I wasn't ready. I was like vaguely aware of the story, but it's fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah, it's right before the show tonight, it kind of just dawned on me as I was reading that this was something that I've always been interested in, and Hastings was a great investigative journalist, so I just thought I'd throw it in there, and if we got to it, there you go. So yeah, it's something to keep our eyes on, and just thinking about not only when you look up like journalists being killed, it comes up with Russia and that sort of thing, but it could be happening here, and certain people, when they get too close to the truth,
And what was he looking into at the time?
Well, at the time, apparently he had some more internal connections and sources, and so he was supposedly getting some good news as far as not news, but information to the inner circles. His first book, he got McChrystal in trouble because he was being McChrystal himself was being very. He was talking bad against the presidential administration just in general. Mm-hmm. And then the second book that he did with him was like a whole bunch of audio and stuff as he followed him around the country and spoke with him and sat in on different meetings with him in his inner circle. That's where even more damning evidence, and he was receiving threats from them that if they didn't like what he reported, they'd kill him, and so it's pretty crazy. Obviously, you got to there's lots of unknowns, and it's a little bit conspiratorial, but it's very strange. It's very strange. He was going so fast down a residential street that his engine was found 60 yards away, I believe the number was. And so he was just he was in a pretty nice car, pretty high-end car, sports car, and it was flying. So very interesting stuff. And I tried not to get too conspiratorial, but it's a damn shame. It was a damn good journalist.
Well, so. Jupiter Judy says that she's been following him since before he was blown up. But Democracy Now! Did a huge segment on him, and she agreed with what you said about General McChrystal and him jamming him up.
Oh yeah,
it's wild. It's wild. I mean, it's amazing when you start to encounter what power, people who hold power can be capable of. Something like this, like there's still question marks around it, but some of the other stuff, read them, and there's things that happen right out in the open that we don't even need like behind the stage crime stuff to really be freaked out about some of the things that are happening right out in the open in our systems. I mean, the stuff at the CIA, it's crazy, but given what we know about the NSA and some of these other things, it's insane. It's kind of mind-boggling what they can do and continue to get away with doing while they point the finger and say, oh, Russia's hacking in and doing all these other things, so
as if it matters. I mean, I'm definitely not one to care where the information comes from, as long as we can reasonably believe it to be true. And from everyone from foreign to domestic officials believe that they look like they're official documents. So I mean, I don't really care if Russia gave them to them or not. But like I said, there's also people in this country that believe that there's no way, and it's probably an internal leak, which things are crazy right now. So that's not actually that hard to believe.
I mean, as far as journalists being careful, I think journalists should always follow through and do their own research. I think that it is true that there's more stories out there than are being reported, because most paid journalism, doesn't focus on actual investigative reporting that are actually stories relevant to the people. there's a whole industry around, you know, corporate media that it's not focusing on digging deep. So I'd say journalists should always follow through, you know, and do their research and back up all of their stuff. But I think WikiLeaks is doing a great service to the American people and to people around the world. And they don't just focus on America.
I want to know how you get paid to put stuff on those fake news sites and the satire sites that people clickbait and believe they're real when you can just scroll to the about or the comment section and see that everything on there is a joke. That's what I want to. That's the kind of website I want to write for.
No, you don't.
For money.
There was a there was a podcast a while back that talked to a guy that was behind one of those fake news sites, and he said that, I mean, he was surprised who was willing to put the product on there. You know, it wasn't that hard to get advertisers, and, you know, just through like Google AdSense and that sort of thing, from what I understand. And, you know, so it wasn't, I don't think it was like great money, but with just the amount of traffic you'd get, and you could set up multiple sites. And so, you know, he was making it work.
Try going to tell a small business owner you're a progressive dealing with environmental issues who wants to end the fossil fuel industry, and see how far that goes.
Exactly.
Speaking of ending the fossil fuel industry, let's go to slide 7. Now, did we practice this, or are we skipping over this one?
We're sending that for next week, I believe.
Next week, we're going to talk about the leaked memo that shows an issue with the Dakota Access Plan. But according to NPR today, the Dakota Access Pipeline will probably already be going by next week, which is a shame. But now we'll get into our activism section. And so we have our taking action, what's happening. 350.org is, Ernest, you know a lot about them. Are they a new environmental activism campaign, or are they a new, like, how long have they been around? And how long have they been doing what they're doing?
Yeah, they've been around for almost a decade now.
Okay.
In fact, they started, it's 350.org because they actually started before there were 350 parts per million carbon in the atmosphere, which at that time, scientists were in agreement that anything over 350, we're going to start experiencing climate destabilization, and that we're really entering uncertain grounds as far as what our experience is going to be like. And now we're at 406, almost 407. We're in the season where the carbon in the atmosphere is going to increase for most of the rest of the year. And so we're at like 406 now, and it's quite possible we can be at 410 by the end of this month.
Wow.
Yeah. So, and as a farmer, when you get over 500 parts per million, plants stop being able to take up certain nutrients, and you end up with drastically reduced nutrition in food. So this is that's pretty significant. And they actually started the divestment from coal campaign several years ago. And so they're actually now able to go back to universities and such that are getting involved in divestment. And they're able to say, you know, if 6 years ago, you know, here's how much money you wouldn't have lost, you'll use, because if we consume all the oil that we know exists today that we can reach, we only need to consume half of that oil that we know exists before we go over the 2 degrees Celsius mark. And we're on track to do that over the next like 20 years, essentially. And so the longer we wait, the sharper, you know, we're eventually going to hit X amount of carbon. And when we hit that, it's going to be, you know, there's already no turning back. And so they've been instrumental in getting that information out They organized a few years ago the world's largest climate march. They had the largest climate march on DC, and then the following year they had a global climate march. And so they really started the pattern for this march and sister kind of thing that we actually have going on now, like literally every weekend so far, almost some weeks every single day of the week since Trump's been elected, since the beginning of January. And so this year, or last May, they did Free from Fossil Fuels 2016. The rest of this month, you can actually go, and if you're having any direct actions against fossil fuel companies, or if you're having a direct action to raise awareness that we need to keep oil in the ground, breakfree2017.org has a map that you can put your project on, and it's a kind of world map. And then in May, they're pushing divestment. So, and then of course, before May, you have the People's Climate March and the March for Science all coming up as well. And then this weekend, we have the Standing Rock March.
And when
That's
is that?
on
Friday is the big march, but they started coming into DC, and they're setting up a demonstration camp in the Memorial Lawn, and they're organizing and lobbying DC, and there's a few demands that the indigenous community has, and the March Friday is to show solidarity for that. And there's also sister marches all across the US as well. And I think the interesting thing is that essentially in 3 days, we're going to build another camp with 10,000 people in it. So.
what? Where's this camp? What is this camp?
Well, that's the march in DC. I mean, we're not going to stay and occupy any space. But if it only takes 3 days to mobilize a direct action camp of 10,000 people, and we do this repeatedly, I believe it puts people under a certain amount of pressure that don't like people standing up for their rights and occupying territory that corporations would prefer to have themselves.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And the more people in the streets, the better, especially with energy.
Mm-hmm. Yep, there's a huge prayer ceremony, that they're essentially having down there. And with all the camps that are now popping up around the country, there's there's just over a half a dozen camps now. There's going to be a dozen by the end of this year. I'm sure of it.
That's fantastic. I mean,
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, it's really important to see people standing up and to just, literally taking a stand, setting up a camp. So it's really good to see this activity.
Yeah, the battle goes on.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, and we're definitely going to highlight more of it when we get to Gen Monthly at the end of the month, and make sure that we're. Go ahead, Ernest.
The Keystone Pipeline is going to be really interesting because one of the things that Iowa did is that they have some communities that have, since the original Keystone fight, they've put community rights legislation into their communities. And this is backed up by their local law enforcement. So the ability for the Keystone Corporation to bring in and hire local police just isn't going to happen like it did in North Dakota, because the police force is actually under obligation to protect their local ordinances, which call upon the police to actually protect and serve if there's an environmental danger. to the people in Iowa.
That sounds great. I mean, have we seen this in action yet? Like,
No. Well,
so
that's
I'm hoping it works.
yeah, that's part of how they shut down the Dakota Access Pipeline a little bit or the Keystone Pipeline in Iowa. And so it'll be interesting to see those communities and their right to self-govern, essentially get tested, which is the same argument that Native nations have, is that, hey, we're people, we should be able to govern ourselves and our culture, and, our rights shouldn't be superseded by a corporation that just wants to make money.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I'm a little skeptical that the police will actually not start policing these camps and things like this. But I hope that they don't. But I don't know. I have nothing to give me any hope, like as far as things that have actually happened. So I mean, those are definitely great initiatives. So we'll have to see what happens.
Yeah,
I think,
we'll definitely.
worth standing around, folks. Federal police and private security firms. I mean, were the city police really involved in that aspect?
Yeah. I mean, they had National Guard out there, and they had private, especially in the beginning, they had private security.
Mhm.
And then Minnesota was the first, I think Minneapolis sheriff was the first one to actually call his police out of there. The Wisconsin police, a lot of them were the ones that did the final eviction for the Occhetti-Sacoan camp. A lot of communities along the Dakota Access Pipeline whose sheriffs were essentially getting paid overtime and hazard pay to go out there and pepper spray people that were organized peacefully trying to protect their water supply.
Yep.
So a lot of people in their own communities went to their own sheriffs and said, no, we don't want our sheriffs going out that way.
Gotcha. All right, well, rounding out our slide, then, we have our broadcast partners we want to give a shout out to, Activate Now, who you're going to be hearing more from towards the end of the month with Eve and Ed Higgins and the gang. They are mobilizing journalists and activists and people that care about the issues that we're talking about, and creating a large broadcasting network to bring all of those groups together. So we're definitely looking forward to partnering with them in the months to come. And the Progressive Unity Project, I apologize to Facebook. Sometimes the software just needs to be just right in order for it to work, and we have problems that happen. But so we will get in touch with you guys. Thank you for putting our stuff out there, and we look forward to trying to do another live broadcast on your page next Tuesday. Go ahead, Sean.
Yeah, I was going to say we're Media Co-op in the working. So, we're definitely trying to figure out the best way to do things. And we appreciate everyone's support and patience as we, try and develop this and get the truth out there to everyone. And we're really excited to be working with all these other great groups.
And so, speaking up, more from the Global Engagement Network, we have Gen Weekly every Tuesday night. We have Gen Monthly, our special monthly web conference. We have Face-to-Face Live on Facebook, and then we have Take Issue with Nico Nolan using Google Hangouts on our YouTube page. And then for our Gen Monthly, which I mentioned before, this is a look at what's coming. In March, we have Water and Its Protectors. Then you can just see our lineup: healthcare, art, anarchism, and activism, LGBTQ history, civics, climate change, who's working, net neutrality, Native American rights, and the history of Thanksgiving, and capitalism, consumerism, and Christmas, which Allison's going to be hosting all by herself. Any closing thoughts from Ernest, Allison, or Sean as we head out?
I will totally do Christmas, capitalism, consumerism, and Christmas with you in December, Allison.
All right, I got a teammate. No, it's great. Thanks everybody for joining us, and share your thoughts and ideas. And we're always glad to have you.
Anyone else?
No, thank you for joining us, and have a good night, and we'll see you next week.
All right.
And if you're interested in being on Gen Weekly, then hit us up on Facebook at Global Engagement Network.
Yep, and YouTube, and there is a new spot on our website, theglobalengagementnetwork.com, where you can send us your information. We will get back in touch with you and get you involved. So remember, with the Global Engagement Network, don't just watch, engage, and have a great week, everybody.
Huzzah!
All right. I assume we're off.